So take the time, write the narrative, write the vision of where you want to be. Because when it comes to those monumental decisions or those crossroads, you're going to have a tool in your belt that will help you get there faster.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. Welcome to Best Practices. With me today is Matt Rosner. Matt, pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me.
I'm glad to be here and glad to have you. We've known each other for several years now, and we both have long tenure in the eye care space, but I'd love to hear a little bit about how you got involved and what's your favorite thing about the industry?
Yeah, good question. So first, my story, I am third generation in the optometric industry. My grandfather was an optometrist. My mom is an optometrist, and I now do growth and development in the optometric industry. And if you asked me 10 years ago if I would be in optometry, the answer wouldn't have been yes. But there wasn't a clear path for me at the time. And when COVID hit, there was an opportunity to work on some exciting new areas of the optometric field and create new solutions to help people who were struggling with symptoms that weren't currently being treated in the way that they potentially could. We'll talk about BVD in a little bit here. But there was a really great opportunity for me to jump in. I had spent time doing restaurant consulting, organizational development. I was in the food business. I was in design. And really all those things culminated into an opportunity to take that sort of user experience mindset and take it into optometry in this new area. So I love optometry for that. But I think more than anything, optometry is a really interesting field for innovation. There are some areas of the business world and healthcare world that have been taken over, run thoroughly through, a corporate mindset, or, it's been cannibalized by PE, or, there's lots of different ways to talk about how an industry has been changed over time. I think optometry is unique in that there is still so much room for innovation, for new perspectives, new approaches, and opportunity for benevolent disruption, if you will.
Well, I think that it's a really important point that there's so much room for innovation, but I would also add, and would love to get your take on this, that there is a necessity for innovation. When I started in eye care, it was 2001, and I don't think I had a cell phone, but I may have had a cell phone. And like even that it's not a certainty that I had one says how different things were in 2001, right? But think about how often you spend looking at a screen. Think about how often you spend looking at multiple screens and how prevalent people using their eyes for smaller things or at different distances than we're accustomed to. So it's not just that there's space for innovation, but we must innovate to respond to the environment we find ourselves in.
Yeah, you're totally right. And I think there's two fronts, and that, I was thinking actually on the business side and the innovation opportunities there. And here we are talking about sort of how are we using our eyes differently today than 20 years ago. And so I think what's exciting, maybe another layer of excitement, is there is room on both sides to innovate, both on patient care and addressing the changing needs of our world and our visual world, and simultaneously taking a look at infrastructure and the ways that we enable teams to be successful in delivering this care, and finding opportunities to give them more joy, create more efficiencies, and to make optometry as enjoyable and as efficient as some of the other medical fields that have been given tons of investment and push for innovation that maybe optometry hasn't been pushed in the same way yet.
Totally agree. I think that actually feeds neatly into what we'd like to discuss today. So, as we're here for best practices, I'd love to get into your ideas for best practices for organizational development. So, you went into your history a little bit. You've done some restaurant consulting, and I went to culinary school myself. So, I have a lot of restaurant experience that I bring into my operations. Things simple as mise en place, which is just like the French term for everything in its place. As a chef, when you get rolling, you don't want to have to move too much. You want to know where everything is such that you don't even look at it. Like you reach and you know it's there. You reach for your salt, you reach for your seasonings, and you don't have to think about it. So when consulting, I talk with practices about doing similar things. Obviously, salt is less relevant, but things like that. So I would love to get, what do you think are best practices from a practice standpoint on the business side for organizational development?
Yeah, it's such a good sort of fun area because most optometrists who start practices are not business minded people. They're excited about the opportunity, but they don't get into it because they have an MBA. They get into it because they maybe didn't want to go into corporate optometry, and this was maybe the other appealing option that gave them a little more freedom, a little more flexibility. But when they go from a cold start, which is usually a one human operation or a two human operation, to 20 people, because they're successful, they're in strong standing in the community, they pick up steam, things change. And so the way I think of development, at least lately, in terms of organizational development, is bit of and I'm a big metaphor guy, so we enter the metaphor universe here. Boats. And when you're a one woman show as an operation in an optometric office, for example, think of it like you're paddling a kayak. You can see the front, you can see the back, and you can feel the wind that's pushing you in one way, one direction or another. And you are responsible for every ounce of distance you go through that paddling. Now, the bigger you get, the more complexity there is. So let's go from a kayak to, let's say, a pontoon boat. Now we can have, for one person to, let's say, 5 or 6 people. And now we're 8 feet wide, we're 15 feet long. We're now dealing with thousands of pounds of weight of all these great humans, maybe 1,500, 2,000 pounds of weight. So now we have more mass. We've got a nice engine in the back. And that engine probably has 750 different pieces, parts to that engine. We've got gas we got to look out for. We now have a speedometer. There's a speed that we're going that both is exciting, but also there's danger. So, we no longer have we can't see the sides of the boat. We have to sort of feel a different perimeter. We no longer can feel if we're going fast or how fast specifically we're going. We need a speedometer. We need tools to sort of measure and guide us. And then we can keep going, and there's really good. Maybe the pontoon is a party, but you get to a small fishing vessel, and now you have to worry about morale. You got a crew of 30 or a crew of 20, and there's different layers of hierarchy and culture that are being developed, one person at a time. So I think I love the boating metaphor because it's what, we as an organization are going through now. And I think a lot of practices experience that, but maybe they don't think about it in the moment. They think about it when it starts hurting or when a pain point comes up and they say, oh, that's hurting. Why is that hurting? And then when we can sort of peel back the layers, we get to learn what's the cause and what do we do about it?
It's such an interesting metaphor for a number of reasons. As you were talking about it, I was thinking about division of labor, right? As you go from a one-person crew to a five-person crew to a 30-person crew, how do you divide who's responsible for what? How do you build those lines of communication? Obviously, really important. And then the other element of it is the scale at which you can predict what's going to happen. If you're operating a kayak, it's just you've got the full control and you can see the stone in front of you. You could choose right, left, or going in reverse. But if you don't happen to see it when you're on a pontoon or a fishing vessel, like someone's got to tell you or something's got to tell you, hey, watch out. And how do
Yeah.
you
And if you've
build a
never hit a
protective
rock,
culture? Yeah.
some lessons you have to learn yourself. If you've never hit a rock before, you don't know where rocks come from. Are they coming from the sky? Are they coming from down below? And so I think part of being a developmental business is always, it's, and one of my mentors calls it a reflexive mindset. We're always reflecting on what just happened. Why did it happen? Is it what we wanted or not? How do we adapt? And so I think in the rock scenario, if you're a kayaker and you hit that rock, you say, huh, when you get to the pontoon, maybe you're looking a little further out than you used to as a kayaker because you're higher up and you've got a larger vantage point. But at some point, when you go from the pontoon to the fishing vessel, you're right. You need someone up in the, I don't know what they call it, the crow's nest, looking
That's
out,
right.
whose specific role is rock looker outer. And so I think it totally depends on where you are in that growth to make it tangible, right? Job descriptions are a really great tool for sort of identifying and clarifying divisions of labor. And if you've never, if you've got 10 people who are all supposed to look out for the rock, but they're all dealing with maybe more urgent things on the boat, you might miss it completely. Alternatively, you've got one crow's nest person whose only job is to look for the rock, and that becomes a much bigger priority because you set someone up to succeed in that role to achieve that outcome.
So I think the metaphor makes good sense. Let's bring it down to the practice level. So let's say we've gone from a cold start to a running practice. We're experiencing our expected organic growth. There's an OD owner, somebody at the front desk, there's a tech, there's a back office person, and there's an optician, right? There's a lot of departments. We've got at least one person in each department ready to do the work. Let's presume for the sake of this conversation that we're growing. How do you develop the organization such that the growth continues, that there is that clarity? And I would like to hear what makes a good job description and perhaps more importantly, what doesn't.
Mm. Well, when we go from, let's say, 2 people to, let's say, 5 or 6 people, something happens, right? The thing that happens is the vision and the motivation can no longer be singular. It can no longer be stored in the founder's brain, body, and soul, but it has to be shared. At this point of growth, there's the opportunity to concretize or solidify why are we doing what we're doing? Which is our sort of mission, how have we agreed or how are we agreeing to behave ourselves on the way to our vision? And the last is, what's our North Star? What's our vision? Why, where would we like to be in X number of years or months? And so I think at this point, even though some people might be listening and say, oh, sounds woo woo, vision, mission, core values, forget about the labels for a minute and just think about what the function of each of them are. Right. So the vision, I'll just repeat it because I think repetition is so helpful in this scenario. Vision is, where are you? Let's pick a timeline. Where would you like to be 3 years from today? What does that look like? What does that feel like? Who's doing what? What's the journey that you're bringing them through 3 years from now? So vision, it can be 1 year out, 3 year out. Less than 1 year is not very helpful. But vision is where you want to be. Next is the mission of why are we here, which is your belief, your organizational belief statement. And that's really important for finding other people who believe what you believe. If you put your mission out there and someone says, that's not for me, good. Because if they're not in resonating frequency with who you are and why you do what you do, they're not going to be a good fit. And it's going to be hard to manage and lead them because they don't believe what you believe. And then last but not least is core values, which, I think gets a little lost in the sauce when it comes to business building. But at the end of the day, it's how are we agreeing to behave ourselves on the way to our stated vision? And if you can do those three, those actually play a really core part in a job description.
Really important point here. So staffing, it continues to be an issue across the industry. A lot of doctors that I speak with, a lot of practice managers that I speak with say it's difficult to find people to work, or we'll hire them and then they'll ghost us or what have you, right? There's a lot of heartburn around this topic in particular. And I think a point you made that is really important that I would like to repeat is that it's okay for your mission statement to be disqualifying of some of your candidates. Now, it's easy for practice owners to want to hire an optician with tons of optical experience. And the logic behind that, I think, is sound. There's a lot to know. There's a lot of expertise to have. In some states, you need to have a license and all of that. Sometimes the assumption is, well, more experience means a better optician, although we both know that's not necessarily the case. It is sometimes, but having an optician or a technician or a front desk person or your office manager be philosophically in alignment with who you are and who you'd like to be as a practice is much more of a shortcut to your continued success than experience they might have had in a field.
Yeah, one of my mentors in the hospitality industry said that you can hire for talent, you can train skill. And what he meant by that, if we, we're not thinking about talent as like gymnastics, but we're thinking about talent as like, what's the core essence of who you are? One talent would be, are you an optimist, a realist, or a pessimist? How do you filter and view the world? Do you assume best intentions? Those are things we can hire for and we can champion. We can't train those. Like those are skills you can train, they're discrete steps, and either they're doing them well or they're not. But the soft side of things, which is the talents you hire and champion for, are really, do they believe what you believe? Are they optimistic? Do they care about how patients feel in the moment? Do they have a core interest or desire in making them feel welcome, making them feel at home, and giving hospitality? And those are things that directly impact how they behave. So, there's a great author, Ari Weinzweig, who's a founder of a deli in Michigan, and he's also a philosopher. But he talks about beliefs are what generate our actions or what dictate or influence our actions. So how we believe directly impacts how we act.
Yeah, I think it was in maybe the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People that has this, what I call it in my head, an E-bar pyramid, where the base of the pyramid is experiences, the next above that is beliefs, and then actions, and then results. So your experiences dictate your beliefs, which dictate your actions, which dictate results. And I think the philosophical connection there, in addition to having that alignment to your mission, it also makes it easier for you to work together in an ongoing way because you don't have to continually realign to the goal. If we go back to the boat analogy, right? And if the captain of the boat wants to go north, but the first mate that you hired has a predilection for east, you got to keep pulling back to the north. And that takes more time. And as your boat gets bigger, it takes longer and longer to realign every time you have to do that. That's not saying don't have dissenting opinions. Absolutely have dissenting opinions. But if you guys are on a boat together, pulling in opposite directions, the boat's going to go slowly.
Yeah, totally. And I think those moments of planning, right? So they talk about disagree in the boardroom, but leave aligned, right? Dissenting thoughts are great when you're choosing a direction, when you're choosing a strategy. But once you choose where you're going, it's crucial for everyone to say north, and then we paddle north. From a sports analogy, you can have an incredible coach. If the player isn't aligned with the team and where they're going, or they're hard to coach, the coach looks bad. It's
Right.
not that the coach is bad necessarily, but the player wasn't the right fit. So that's a whole different topic around, is someone coachable? And if you're an introvert as an owner, are you going to be able to coach or guide someone who's incredibly extroverted and loud spoken? Sometimes not. And so there's all these different layers to sort of how to pick great people for your team. And also having in our hiring process, if someone makes it through, we're excited. But if at the end of 2 weeks, someone doesn't make it through, we're also excited because it means that our organizational immune system worked, whether it was on talent, their belief set, or skill, their ability to achieve what we need them to achieve within our framework. And, so I think it's okay. It shouldn't feel bad if after 2 weeks, someone doesn't pass the test and you're not able to keep them on long term because you stuck to what you needed out of them in the context of your clinic. It's an okay thing to have a yes and a no.
That's also really important, something that is frequently missed. Again, we know that staffing is an issue, and when a practice finally does make a decision and hire somebody, if they're not working out, people do frequently fall victim to the sunk cost fallacy. Like, I've already gone through this process to hire, we've already filled out the paperwork, they already have a name tag, and they're not working out, but maybe we can coach them up. Instead of, to your point, of letting the practice, the business immune system take care of that. I understand not wanting to confront. I understand not wanting to fire anybody. It's not a pleasant conversation to have. But if you're feeling that it's not working out, odds are your new hire feels it too. You can save you both a lot of heartache by pulling that band-aid early.
Yeah, you're right. If it's a team that there's a new person, let's say there's 7 people and the eighth person is the new hire, one of the ways to help, maybe this is a quick nugget that you can leverage. If you're hiring your eighth person, involve the other 7 people in that process because they are this person's future coworker, right? As long as you've got a culture that rewards great performance and it's not toxic or overly competitive, the ideal is they get to meet and connect with their future workmate, their future colleague. And through this process, they'll tell you, I don't think they're a good fit. And they can tell you why. They'll say, wow, I would love to have them on our team. They have such good energy. I think they would add just that spark. So I think that collaborative hiring and that not necessarily letting your employees make the decision. I want to distinguish there, but having them meet, give you guidance. You, as the practice owner or manager, are the decision maker, but having them influence and be part of the process, give them a little ownership, can go a long way to sort of flexing that immune system. And even maybe before you hire, get more insight.
This also applies not just to a new hire, not just to growing your business from headcount or financially, but as you add services. I think the point is extremely well made. Get your team on board before you make a change that affects their everyday, whether it is a new specialty or a new piece of equipment or you're changing the name of your business or whatever. If you put somebody in front of this information and they don't like it, they're going to be defensive because in their head, they're wrestling with, well, I don't like this, but I can't tell my boss about it. So I'm just going to try to deal with it as best I can and then watch the resentment fester.
No, it's a great point. And I'll give you a story. I was doing some consulting for a practice out east, and she wanted to bring in a new specialty, but she had a team that it wasn't leaderless, but it didn't have clear. If you asked anyone why they were there, they would say, I'm here because I have a job. Like I work this job at this business. And, why do you do what you do? They'll probably say, well, I'm taking care of patients and then I go home at 5 p.m. And so she wanted to bring in this new service. And so the first thing I said was, we need to work on where we're headed. Adding a new service is a step, right? But we're adding this new service in the service of what? Like, where do you want to go? Where
To
are we
end.
headed? To what end? Where are we headed that this service makes sense to add now to take us there? And what we ended up doing was building a strategy to say, hey, before you're ever going to tell them about the new service, I want you to tell them what this practice is going to look like 2 years from now, what it's going to feel like, what the experience of coming to work is going to be like. There's a great acronym from Martin Seligman on well-being, PERMA, which stands for positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement. And so when we work on vision, I always try to incorporate some of the PERMA elements because it resonates emotionally with people who are seeking a higher level of well-being. So if we're talking about what does engagement with patients look like 2 years from now, maybe today it's rushed and it doesn't feel personal and we can't spend a moment and just get to know someone today. But 2 years from now, we want to be able to have 5 minutes to just check in with Mrs. Jones and see how her kids are doing when she comes into the office and not rush, rush, rush. So I say all of that because if we're just adding something, but we don't give it context in the greater arc of our growth or our success as a practice, we're missing out. And furthermore, if they're bought into where you're headed, it is much easier to align your moves or your steps, like adding a specialty, with what they've already agreed is a great outcome. And so you're much less likely to get pushback because you've given them some ownership and given them an idea of where you're headed so they can do some of the math on their own.
I'm starting to pick up on some themes here, Matt, and correct me if I'm wrong, right? So, for organizational growth, best practices for organizational growth start with understanding who you are as a person, as a business owner, as a business. Who are you and what do you represent? What would you like to be? Hire with that in mind, right? Hire for people that align with that or can supplement that or give you another perspective on that that makes you as a business or you as an owner better. Correct mistakes quickly, test that organizational immune system and let it do its job and keep it, fed. Involve the rest of the team. And I think this one is the last one is the theme that I actually think is resonating with everything that you're saying is take a longer view of your business. I think we have a tendency, and maybe this is a uniquely American thing, and maybe it isn't, but we have a tendency to think of things in the immediate term, kind of to the exclusion of everything else, one quarter at a time. I'm going to this event and I'm going to buy this thing and I'm going to bring it back to my office and we're going to implement it and it's going to go however it goes. But what you're suggesting in everything that you're talking about is take a longer view. Think about what your practice is going to look like in 2 years and build in that direction.
Yeah. And a vision setting, again, in the woo-woo category of business, but really it's knowing it, taking the time, truthfully. I get, when I'm in clinic and it's a Monday at 1 p.m., things are things are going. Like that is not the time to sit back, take a deep breath, with a pen and paper and think about 2 years from now. Right. So in some ways, just like a business retreat, you've got to carve out time, instead of watching that show on Netflix, take those 45 minutes after dinner and just sit with yourself and think about the future, what you'd like to. And there's lots of great resources around visioning, but taking a longer view of your business means that you are you're not responding to the day to day to plan your future. You're making decisions like the person you talked about in that 2 year vision. You're already starting to sort of make strategic decisions that get you closer there. And I find in the clients I work with, when we read a 2 year vision, like 75% of it's done at the 1 year mark because they had clarified it, they had put the stake in the ground, and they said, this is where I want to be. It's just easier to move more quickly in that direction because it's clear. Taking a longer view can really enable us to, when you're at a show, you're talking to these sales reps or a company about bringing on a piece of equipment or a new specialty, being able to ask yourself, does this align with where I said I wanted to be 2 years from now? Taking more time with patients, earning more money, reducing my reliance on vision plans. If yes, move forward. If not, that's a really strong sign to say, you know what, this is interesting, but it doesn't align with my 2 year vision. And maybe 2 years from now, you'll recalibrate and it might fit later. But it's so helpful to have your internal compass in the form of a vision or a longer view of your business to filter these opportunities through so that you're not plagued by the shiny object complex that we all feel at these big shows.
Also, a super important point. If you have an overarching goal that you're trying to achieve, you are less likely to be distracted by something new and unexpected. What happens if the thing that you've just heard about is meaningful and unexpected, but how do you decide maybe this is worth extending my vision a little bit and I've really got to do this thing? Maybe an unexpected hire, a local doc is retiring, is offering you to buy their practice, or you get waylaid by something. How do you navigate that and continue on your vision?
Yeah, this happens a lot. And there's a couple clients and prospects that I'm working with right now who have these scenarios. Now the vision is sort of where we're headed, but we have two other things that we had put in place before we started growing that we can lean back on. One is our mission. So why are we doing this? And two
Mhm.
is our core values. And so if the vision, so vision is a living document. And you can write a vision for every single day if you want. My vision, you start out the day and say, by the end of today, here's what I will say that I felt, and here's what I accomplished. And you can do this on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. It's really about setting intention, usually using a framework with a certain bit of approach. But if the vision doesn't, this 2 year vision doesn't accommodate this new and exciting thing that really resonates, you can put the vision aside for a second and look at the other two that are core parts of your organizational material, the core values and the mission. If this new opportunity aligns with your mission of bringing new types of care to patients in desperate need, check. And if that's something that resonates, check. And then we look at our core values. And maybe one of the core values is we filter all new opportunities through, or we think through things before making decisions. And we involve multiple stakeholders. So maybe the question is, okay, we sit down with the team, right? Not everything has to be a team decision, but maybe the leadership team, 2 or 3 people, and say, okay, we've got this unique opportunity. Does this fit within our core values? And having that conversation, because weighing those options, pros and cons, right? Every decision's got those pluses and minuses, and coming out to say, you know what? It doesn't fit with our vision, but it's so in line with our core values, and we're all aligned as a leadership team. Let's do it. And we're going to change our vision. We're going to rewrite our vision in a slightly different direction that enables us to accommodate this. And so I think that there are different elements that can help sort of steer that journey to make a decision you feel good about.
So what I didn't hear in that explanation is just go with your gut. I didn't hear that.
Fair. And gut is important. I think there's something to be said for trusting your gut.
Yeah,
And people
but I
thrive on it,
think
right? Like there are a lot of people who,
yeah,
who do trust their gut, and that is the core of their success.
and I think there's an argument to be made that if your gut is saying no, there's probably a reason not to. But just because your gut is saying yes in the moment doesn't mean you should. And having lenses through which you can look at this decision will make your long-term success much more likely. And I think a thought
Yeah, let the
approach, a
gut
measured,
inspire to explore, does this fit? Like let the gut push you into the ring and onto the field to have that conversation, but maybe not have the gut dictate the entire
it
decision.
shouldn't be all of the decision-making process, but it can inspire the need for a decision-making process to occur.
Totally.
All right.
Yeah.
Matt, I'm going to challenge you to give me a summary of your best practices for organizational development based on the conversation we've had so far.
I think first is define who you are. And I'm going to actually, Steve, I think you did a pretty solid job of sort of distilling what we had talked about thus far. So I'm going to echo those and sort of add some color. So first, know who you are and take time to meditate on why you got into optometry to begin with. It, there are a lot of things, costs, taxes, economics, politics, that can push us as people and business owners in different directions. But having spent time to define who you are and why you're doing what you're doing can help you in those moments of uncertainty to sort of return to center and not get too derailed by any one thing. I would say the next thing is believe in your people. Hire good people, trust them and believe in them. Of course, verify that they're creating the outcomes that they need. I operate with best intentions and assumption of best intentions. So if something happens that is unexpected or maybe not part of what you expect or accept as a standard, I always assume first, maybe there's something going on. So if a patient doesn't call you back, maybe they've got something going on in their life that's preventing them from doing the thing that we agreed they were going to do. Right. And in that way, you build some grace into the process. And many times that's usually what happens. Oh, sorry, I got so busy and my kid got sick, but I'm ready to pick up that frame or that pair of lenses. So to assume best intentions. And and this comes from some of the Ari Weinswig philosophy, create clear expectations. One of the things, and we've talked a little about job descriptions, there was a study done on workplace satisfaction over, I think, a 70-year period. It was an incredibly robust longevity study on careers and workplace enjoyment. And, they tried to figure out what was the one element that predicted long-term satisfaction and success in a career and a job. And it wasn't ping pong tables, it wasn't free beer or kombucha on tap. It was clear expectations. And so if you as a business owner can outline what do you expect from the person you're hiring, what would you like for them to do for you, for your patients, for the business, and then hold them to that, that can be an incredible predictor of their long-term success. And the opposite of that is they don't know what you expect. So they're walking on eggshells, or they're doing things that don't really match where you thought the business would go. And oftentimes it's just because you haven't spent the time to sit down and actually clarify and write down those expectations. So we went through a growth spurt as a clinic about 10 years ago. And one of the things we didn't have were job descriptions. And so there was a blurred lines of who's responsible for what, and everything felt personal, and oh, she's doing this or he's doing that. And so I think clear expectations is a really great element. Another nugget that I would throw in is build good process and use it. But if something in the business feels personal, it usually means one of two things. Either you don't have a process or you're not using it. So if an employee behavioral issue comes up and you as the owner is like, I don't know if I should say something. It's not really, we haven't seen this before. This is a new scenario. You have to ask yourself that's personal, right? When I say if business feels personal, like that sort of hemming and hawing, should I not? What you can do is behavioral expectations. As a business owner, you say, here's what we, in line with our core values, we treat each other with respect and kindness. We treat our patients with respect and kindness. And then as a business owner, let's say that lapse in judgment or that lapse in behavior from an employee, it contradicts one of those things on your behavioral expectations. You can say, hey, Jimmy, I want to just pull you aside for a sec. What happened, a patient came in, it was 2 minutes after we closed. You sort of yelled at him because we were closed and you weren't very nice. And the impact of that was that I think we lost a long-term loyal patient, and I'm going to have to work really hard as a business owner to bring them back in, but it wasn't the right outcome. So we sort of wrap in the situation, the behavior, and the impact and say, it's not in line with, what we've agreed as a business, how we want to treat our patients. So I want to give you an opportunity to, I want to talk about that. What happened? And sort of open the conversation up to see what's going on. And it's not necessarily a reason to fire Jimmy, but that, because we have the process, we're leaning on the process rather than, hey, I saw this and I think that wasn't right. Right? That's personality, that's opinion, not process. So I think the last thing I would throw in there is when something goes wrong, I always ask first, is there a process issue? There are a lot of people who are in management roles but aren't necessarily trained as leaders. And so when something happens, they say, Sally did that. Let's ask ourselves as business owners, what happened? Let's walk back through. She was, let's say she broke a frame when she was popping in some lenses for an updated RX. But let's just say that the frame breaks. And now let's say that maybe Sally's the one actually that the business feels personal. She goes back to the patient and says, I'm so sorry, the frame broke. And the patient says, well, what are you going to do to fix it? And Sally says, well, I don't know. Let me go ask my manager. Right. And in that moment, if you had a policy, and let's say that office doesn't have a policy for broken frames and a patient didn't sign anything before you swap those lenses. And so now Sally and the manager have to take 5-10 minutes to sort of hem and haw back and forth. What are we going to do? This is the third time this month, and it's going to cost us a lot. We have frames that maybe are used or lightly used. So it becomes this inefficiency of decision making because there wasn't a process. But had there been a process, she said, you know what? In this scenario, because you got them from us and it's been within the last 3 months, we're going to be able to swap that for you with a small cost. Or hey, because it's a year and you signed that agreement, it said, "Hey, we're going to use a used frame that's 2 years old and it might break. And if it does, we're not responsible for it, but I can give you a 20% discount on a new frame to get you started." So having processes in place, we never assume that it's the person who's the issue. We always look at the process first to see, is
Right.
there something worth solving? And then we say, if we fixed all the processes and that they were still having X issue, then we look at the employee.
One of the things that I find is valuable for me is like you know me well enough to know I love being right. I love being correct about something, but I also really relish being incorrect about something. It's an opportunity to learn. But what I really dislike is being wrong about the same thing twice. And if I'm wrong about the same thing for a second time, that's a process issue. It's not a situational thing. It's that my expectations were misaligned with reality and I need to adjust my expectations. So, in learning this process, if the frame broke and you didn't have them sign the form or you went against policy or whatever, like that was already in place and you could have done better as an individual. But if you don't have that process in place, then the individual couldn't have done better because they didn't know there was another option. So, it's that constant appetite for learning that makes you better at what you do. So I think that was a really useful example in how to think about these things and how to continue with ongoing development. I appreciate your insights. And if we were to wrap up your thoughts from this conversation, anything else you'd like to add, what would you say to the audience of best practices for organizational development?
I'd say first thing is take time to figure out sort of who you are, why you're doing what you're doing, why you're an optometrist, why you own an independent practice, and where you want things to be. Right? You are the decision maker, you're the practice owner. You set the vision. And if you don't write the narrative, you will be a character in someone else's narrative. So take the time, write the narrative, write the vision of where you want to be. Because when it comes to those monumental decisions or those crossroads, you're going to have a tool on your belt that will help you get there faster. Now, if we zoom out one level to your team, when you're hiring, be clear about the expectations. Set very clear expectations, both on what you want them to achieve and how you want them to achieve it. Behavioral expectations are a really powerful thing, and they're completely allowed on the job description. So that would be one part of the team. But the other part is trust your team and give them the tools to be successful. And if they're not being successful, ask what process might be in the way or what might need to fix to make them more successful, to enable them more success. Let them create the value and make processes and systems to have them be successful on your behalf.
Sounds easy enough. Why isn't everybody doing that? Because it's I think it's good conceptually, the logic is super sound, but in practice it actually takes a lot of effort to get good at what you're describing, especially if you're not predisposed to it from the get-go. So I think it's, meditate on it and get and practice and get better, iterate. I think there's always room for improvement, but if you focus on understanding who you are as a business and finding people who fit that, every day will be a little bit easier than if you do the opposite.
Yeah. And, it's the same sort of push, but be patient. Constant gentle pressure, but be patient with yourself because this is not an overnight shift. And in fact, if you try and do this overnight, your whatever immune system in your business you built will kick it back. So take the time, think about it, really be intentional, and it will yield multiples of value.
Matt, I want to thank you for sharing your best practices for organizational growth. Any final thoughts on that before we wrap up?
I think we're good.
Fantastic. Matt, I can't thank you enough for the conversation and your insights. I think the audience here will really appreciate that, can learn a ton from it. If they want to reach out to you with questions, how do they get in touch?
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn, Matt Rosner. You can email me, matt@nvminstitute.org, and I would love to connect and help you get closer to your vision of success